My name is Robert Caldwell. I am 63 years old. I live alone now in a house on Meridian Hill Drive in Charlotte, North Carolina that has 4 bedrooms, a study I actually use, a kitchen I cook real food in every morning, and a backyard with a maple tree that I planted the year my son was born. I want to tell you something about that tree before we go anywhere else in this story. I planted it when Marcus was 3 weeks old. I drove to a garden center on a Saturday morning with my wife Ellen sitting in the passenger seat and Marcus in the car seat behind us, making the specific small sounds that newborns made. And I bought a maple sapling that was about 2 feet tall and cost $11. I planted it that afternoon in the corner of the backyard, and Ellen stood at the kitchen window watching me dig the hole, and later she brought me a glass of water and said, "You know, that tree is going to outlive both of us." She was right about that. She was usually right. The tree is now 34 feet tall. I can see it from my study window. I see it every morning when I sit down with my coffee at 5:45 before the rest of the day starts. I see it and I think about what it took to plant it, not just the $11 and the Saturday morning, the years before that. The specific long road from a boy with nothing in a small town in rural South Carolina to a man who could afford to buy a house with a backyard big enough to plant a tree in. The distance between those 2 points is the part of this story that matters most, and that I am going to take you through completely before we get to the vacation and the card and the hotel manager and the police. Because here is the thing about what happened at that luxury resort in Scottsdale, Arizona, on a Friday evening in June. It only makes sense if you understand who I was before it happened. Not what I owned, not what I had built, who I was, where I came from, what I had learned from people who had nothing and gave me everything anyway. My daughter-in-law's name is Vanessa. She is 31 years old. She is beautiful in the specific way that some people were beautiful, completely aware of it, and very skilled at using that awareness as a tool. She is smart in the specific way that some people were smart, sharp enough to read a room and position herself correctly within it, quick enough to identify what people wanted to hear and say exactly that. She is also the kind of person who had never in her life considered the possibility that the ground she was standing on had been prepared by someone else. She found out what that meant on a Friday evening in June. I am going to tell you everything, the full picture, not because I need you to think I was right, and I know it, and that is enough, but because the full picture is the only way this story makes sense, and this story deserves to make sense. If you are new here, hit that like button right now and subscribe. I put out a new story every week. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I am going to read it. Now let us go back to the beginning. All the way back. I was born in 1961 in a town called Darlington, South Carolina. Not the Darlington that appeared on maps as a landmark. The NASCAR Speedway was there, and for 2 weekends a year the town transformed into something recognizable from the outside. The Darlington I grew up in was the other one, the one that existed the other 50 weeks of the year when the cameras were not there. Small houses on unpaved roads. A single main street with a hardware store, a diner, a barbershop, and a pharmacy that also sold school supplies because the school supply budget did not extend to a dedicated store. A tobacco farming community that had been declining slowly for 30 years before I was born, and that continued declining slowly for 30 years after. My father, James Caldwell, worked at a textile mill 7 miles from town. He drove there every morning in a truck that he kept running through a combination of mechanical knowledge and the specific determination of someone for whom that truck was not a convenience, but a necessity without which the entire structure of the family's daily life collapsed. He had been doing this since he was 19 years old. He was 51 when I was born. He was 68 when he retired, and he spent 17 years after retirement doing exactly what he had done on weekends his entire working life, which was gardening, fishing, and sitting on the front porch in the evenings watching the road. He never complained about his work, not once, not in a way I ever heard. He went to the mill and he came home and he sat at the dinner table and he asked about our days and he listened to the answers with the genuine attention of someone who considered what his children said to be worth listening to. That attention, the specific quality of being genuinely listened to by a man who had every reason to be too tired to listen, that is the most valuable thing my father ever gave me. More valuable than any money, more valuable than any advice. The experience of being listened to by someone who was tired and showed up anyway taught me something I have tried to practice my entire adult life. People can feel when you are actually there. My mother, Dorothy Caldwell, was a seamstress. She sewed at home, alterations, repairs, custom work for the families in the area who needed something special. She had a Singer sewing machine in the back bedroom that made a specific rhythmic sound that was the background noise of my entire childhood. I can still hear it if I close my eyes, the steady mechanical rhythm of something producing something useful. She had a gift for the work, an eye for how fabric wanted to move, and a hand precise enough to make it move that way, and she was known in the county for it. She also ran the household with a mathematical precision that I did not fully appreciate until I was an adult trying to understand how she had done what she had done on what she had to work with. There were 4 children in our family. I was the youngest. My father's mill income and my mother's sewing income together produced a budget that was real and tight, and that my mother managed without waste and without complaint, and with a specific cheerfulness that I now understand as a deliberate choice made every single day. She was cheerful because she had decided to be cheerful, because the alternative did not produce a better outcome, and she was too practical to spend energy on things that did not produce better outcomes. I inherited that from her, the specific practicality, the preference for what actually works over what feels good in the moment. School was where I first understood that I had something. Not immediately, not from the beginning. The beginning of school was difficult in the specific way that school was difficult for children who came from homes where books were not abundant and where the academic preparation that wealthier children arrived with was simply not part of the background. I was not behind because I was not capable. I was behind because the runway had been shorter. By 3rd grade, I had caught up. By 5th grade, I was consistently at the top of my class. Not in every subject. In mathematics, specifically, I had the kind of natural facility that made the teacher, a man named Mr. Harrigan who was 60 years old and had been teaching elementary school for 35 years, and who had the specific gift of recognizing something genuine when he saw it, made Mr. Harrigan say to my mother at a parent conference, "Mrs. Caldwell, your son sees numbers differently from other children. I mean that as the highest compliment I know how to give." My mother told me about this conversation when I was in high school. She told it the way she told most important things, matter-of-factly, without embellishment, as information rather than as praise. She said, "Mr. Harrigan told me you see numbers differently. I told him I always knew that. Then I told him we needed to make sure the school was giving you problems that were hard enough." They were not initially, but Mr. Harrigan made sure they became harder. He pushed me, not in the exhausting, performative way of someone who wanted credit for developing a student, in the quiet, steady way of someone who understood that a gift unused was eventually a gift lost. I went to high school in Darlington. High school was the period when I understood clearly for the first time that the path I was on led somewhere specific, not to a textile mill, not to a seamstress's machine, not to the slow, comfortable settling that the town seemed to offer as its primary product. I loved my town. I loved my parents. I did not want their lives, and I was not ashamed of not wanting them because I was also certain they did not want their lives for me. My father said something to me when I was 16 that I have written down in multiple notebooks over the years because I did not want to forget the exact words. He said, "Robert, I worked at that mill so you would not have to, not because the mill was beneath you, because you have something in you that the mill cannot use. It would be wrong to put it somewhere it cannot be used." I said, "What is it, the thing in me?" He said, "The ability to see what is coming before it gets here. I watch you. You look at situations the way I look at weather. You see what direction it is moving before most people even know "It is a storm." I said, "Is that something I can build a life on?" He said, "It is the only thing worth building a life on." I got a scholarship to Clemson University in 1979. Not a full scholarship, partial. I covered the rest through a combination of work-study, a part-time job at a restaurant near campus, and one summer job between freshman and sophomore year working construction in Charleston that paid better than anything else available to a 19-year-old without connections, and that left me with the specific physical knowledge of what hard work felt like when it was done with your body rather than your mind. I studied accounting and finance, not because it was the most glamorous option, because it was the most direct path to the thing my father had identified in me. The ability to see what was coming before it arrived was most useful in a field where you were reading numbers that represented real things and making predictions about where those real things were heading. I was good at it in the way that went beyond academic performance. I understood what the numbers were telling me underneath the surface, what they meant about the actual condition of whatever business or situation they described, what they suggested about what was coming, and what decisions would make sense given what was coming. I graduated in 1983 with a degree that represented 4 years of work that I was genuinely proud of and approximately $12,000 in student loan debt that I paid off over the following 3 years through a discipline that would have made my mother nod with recognition. My first job was at a regional accounting firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had chosen Charlotte specifically, not because I had family there, not because I knew anyone there, but because Charlotte in 1983 was a city that was growing in specific ways that I had read about and that I believed were going to continue, and that suggested the professional opportunity that was going to expand alongside the city's expansion. I was right about that. I was right because I was paying attention to the things that most 22-year-olds were not paying attention to, not because I was smarter, because my father had told me to watch where things were moving and I had taken that seriously. The accounting firm was called Henderson and Associates. 12 people, mid-size commercial clients, a senior partner named Gerald Henderson who was 63 years old and who had the specific quality of a man who had seen enough careers develop and collapse to know within 6 months whether a new hire had what it took to build something lasting. He told me at my 6-month review that I had better instincts for what a balance sheet was actually saying than any junior associate he had hired in a decade. I said, "Thank you, what do I do with that?" He said, "You learn everything about corporate finance that I can teach you, and then in a few years you go do what I know you are going to do." I said, "What is that?" He said, "Something on your own." He was right. I worked at Henderson and Associates for 6 years. I learned everything Gerald could teach me, and several things I taught myself through the specific education of sitting across from business owners and reading their financial situations and understanding not just where they were, but why they were there and what choices had produced the results I was looking at. In that 6 years, I developed a specific professional specialty that was unusual enough to be genuinely valuable. I became very good at identifying the gap between what a business appeared to be worth and what it was actually worth. The specific divergence between surface value and structural value that appeared in financial statements if you knew what you were looking at, and that most people, including many experienced financial professionals, did not see clearly. This gap was the foundation of everything I built after. In 1989, I left Henderson and Associates. Not dramatically, not with conflict, with gratitude and a handshake from Gerald, who said, "I told you 6 years ago you would do something on your own. I am glad I was right." I registered Coldwell Financial Advisory in March of 1989. 1 office, 1 desk, 1 phone, and a client list that consisted entirely of the word potential for the first 4 months. I want to tell you about those 4 months because they were the most important period of my professional life, and they were also the most difficult. No clients meant no income. I had savings from 6 years of living well below my salary at Henderson, which had been deliberately done in preparation for exactly this period. I had enough to cover 14 months of personal expenses and office costs if I was disciplined. I was disciplined. What I was not was certain. There is a specific kind of uncertainty that comes when you have stepped off one solid thing and the next solid thing has not yet materialized. It is different from the uncertainty of a problem you are trying to solve. It is more physical. It lives in the chest and the stomach, and it is present in the specific quality of the 2 in the morning silence when you are not asleep, and the only company you have is your own thoughts about whether the decision you made was right. I sat with that uncertainty for 4 months. I did not let it change my decisions. My first client came through a referral from a dentist named Charles Williams, who I had met at a church event 2 months after opening the practice. Charles had been having trouble with the financial structure of his growing dental practice, specifically with understanding why his revenues were increasing while his cash position kept tightening, which is a specific and very common problem in service businesses that has a specific and very solvable cause. I spent 3 hours with Charles's financials on a Tuesday evening. I came back on Wednesday morning and I showed him exactly why his cash was tight despite his revenue growth. Accounts receivable timing, equipment depreciation choices, and an insurance billing cycle that was creating a 30-day gap between service delivery and payment receipt that his operating costs were not structured to accommodate. I also showed him a 3-step adjustment that would close that gap over the following quarter. Charles looked at my analysis. He said, "I have had 2 accountants look at this in the last year. Neither of them showed me anything like this." I said, "They were probably looking at where you were. I was looking at why you were there and where the structure was taking you." He said, "How much do I owe you?" I told him. He paid it without discussion. Then he called 3 other dentists he knew and told them about me. I want you to understand the significance of that moment, not the payment, the phone calls he made after it, because that is where everything actually started. Not with me finding clients, with me doing work so clearly and so well that the client's natural instinct was to make sure the people they knew could access the same thing. Quality of work as a growth strategy, not marketing, not networking events, not business cards, the work. My father had understood that. He maintained that truck not because he enjoyed maintaining it, but because the truck's reliability was non-negotiable, and the only way to ensure its reliability was to take care of it properly. I took care of the work the same way. By the end of 1989, I had 11 clients. By the end of 1990, I had 27. By 1993, I had a staff of 4 and a client portfolio that included some of the fastest-growing mid-size businesses in the Charlotte metropolitan area. In 1994, I met Ellen. She was a high school English teacher. She was 31. She had the specific quality of a person who was genuinely interested in the world and who communicated that interest through the questions she asked rather than the statements she made. She was not impressed by what I had built. She was interested in how I had built it and what I had learned from building it and what I thought about the people I worked with. She was the first person since my father who listened the way my father listened. We were married in 1995. Marcus was born in 1990. I know the math on that. Marcus was born before I met Ellen. His mother was a woman I had been with briefly in my early years in Charlotte, a relationship that ended before Marcus arrived, but that left me with something I did not have before, a son who was now 4 years old and who needed a father who was present in the specific, consistent way that my father had been present for me. I was present. Not perfectly, not without mistakes, but completely committed to showing up in the ways that mattered. Every weekend, every school event, every conversation that Marcus wanted to have, including the ones that happened at inconvenient times because children did not schedule their important conversations around adult convenience. Ellen stepped into Marcus's life with the same natural completeness she brought to everything. She did not perform the role of stepmother. She was simply present and consistent and genuinely interested in who Marcus was, and Marcus, who was a perceptive child in the specific way that children were perceptive when they had been paying close attention to the adults around them from an early age, understood the difference between performed care and real care within the first month. He called her Mom when he was 6 years old. She cried in the kitchen where she thought I could not see her. I saw her. I did not say anything. Some moments did not need words. By 2000, Coldwell Financial Advisory had grown into something I had not fully anticipated when I started it. Not just a successful mid-size advisory practice, but a specialized firm that had developed a specific reputation for turnaround work. Companies that were struggling financially, that had the underlying structure of something viable, but that had made decisions or encountered circumstances that had put them in serious trouble. Those companies came to me because the work I had done for 11 years had made it clear that I could see what most people could not see and fix what most people could not fix. Turnaround work paid differently from standard advisory work, not just financially, though it paid substantially more. It paid in the specific satisfaction of taking something that was broken and making it work. The engineering satisfaction. The same satisfaction I imagined my father felt when the truck that had been running rough started running clean again. I made my first $1 million in net worth in 1998. I made my second in 2001. By 2005, the practice had annual revenues of $4.2 million, and I had built a team of 19 professionals who were genuinely excellent at what they did and who I paid at the top of the market because I knew from 20 years of professional life exactly what good work was worth, and I was not willing to underpay for it. I bought the house on Meridian Hill Drive in 2003. I planted the maple tree in the backyard that same year. Marcus was 13. Ellen stood at the kitchen window and watched me dig the hole. She brought me a glass of water. She said, "You know that tree is going to outlive both of us." I said, "That is exactly why I am planting it." She looked at me with the specific expression she had when I had said something that she was going to think about for the rest of the day. That was the life I built. From Darlington, South Carolina, from a textile mill and a Singer sewing machine, from 4 months of 2 in the morning uncertainty and 11 clients who became 27, who became a practice that touched every major sector of the Charlotte business community. That life, that specific, real, built from nothing life, is what Vanessa called unsuccessful. On a Tuesday evening in April, at the dinner table in the house I paid for over food I had cooked, she called me unsuccessful and told me I was not the kind of person she wanted around her family vacation. I want to tell you about Vanessa before I tell you about that Tuesday evening, because you need to understand who she was before you can understand what she did and why it landed the way it did, and why my response was not impulsive, but was instead the most considered decision I had made in years. Hit that like button now. Subscribe if you are not already. Drop a comment below. Stay with me because the next point is where Vanessa's full story comes out and where you begin to understand exactly how a person like her was made. Marcus met Vanessa in 2018. He was 28 at the time. He had finished his MBA at Wake Forest the previous year and had just started as an associate at a commercial real estate development firm in Charlotte that was doing interesting work in mixed-use urban development. He was good at his job in the specific way that he was good at most things, through genuine interest and careful attention rather than through raw aggressive ambition. He had my father's quality of genuine attentiveness and Ellen's quality of curiosity, and whatever I had given him, which was the specific ability to read a situation clearly and understand what was actually happening rather than what appeared to be happening. He met Vanessa at a charity gala that his firm had sponsored. Vanessa was there as the guest of a senior partner at a law firm who was one of the event's major donors. She was 25. She was wearing a dress that communicated everything she wanted it to communicate. She had the specific quality of someone who moved through a room as though the room had been arranged for her convenience and who found this entirely natural. Marcus told me about her 3 weeks after they met. He was sitting in my study, the same study where I am sitting right now, and he had the specific animated quality that he had when he was genuinely excited about something. He described her with the kind of comprehensive detail that young men used when they were in the early days of falling for someone, and when every detail of the person seemed significant and illuminating. I listened. I asked one question. I said, "Marcus, what does she care about?" He thought about it. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Not what she does, not what she likes. What does she care about? What keeps her up at night? What makes her genuinely sad? What makes her genuinely happy in a way that has nothing to do with other people watching?" He thought about it longer. He said, "I do not know yet." I said, "Find out. That is the most important thing there is to know about a person." He nodded. He did not find out. Not fully, not the way I meant. Or he found out and he loved her anyway and decided that what he found was something he could work with. I did not know which it was for a long time. I came to understand it eventually, but by the time I understood it, clearly a great deal had already happened. I met Vanessa for the first time at a dinner at Marcus's apartment in October of 2018. She arrived carrying a bottle of wine that cost enough to signal awareness of cost. She was dressed precisely and carefully in the way of someone for whom appearance was a primary communication tool and who had become very skilled at using it. She shook my hand when Marcus introduced us and looked at me with the specific evaluative attention of someone taking inventory. Not warmly, assessively. I registered this and I filed it away. The dinner conversation was pleasant in the surface way that first dinners were pleasant. She was charming and well-spoken and asked appropriate questions and made appropriate comments. She had the specific social skill of a person who had learned what to say in any given context, not through genuine interest, but through observation and imitation. There was one moment in the evening that told me something real. We were talking about Marcus's work, the commercial real estate project he was currently excited about, a mixed-use development in the Noda neighborhood of Charlotte that was genuinely interesting from a structural finance perspective. Marcus was describing it with his characteristic enthusiasm. Vanessa interrupted him midway through. Not rudely, smoothly, she redirected the conversation to a development project she had heard about in uptown Charlotte, a luxury condo tower that was getting significant press coverage. She described it with a specific kind of enthusiasm that was different from Marcus's. His enthusiasm was about the work. Hers was about the address, the name recognition, the status communication of the building's location, and the kind of people who would live in it. It was a subtle moment, the kind of moment that could easily be read as nothing more than a young woman talking about something that interested her. I noted it because I was the kind of person who noted things like that. I said nothing about it to Marcus. What I did was observe. I observed Vanessa over the following year with the same patient attention I brought to any complex situation I was trying to understand. Not with suspicion. I did not want to be the suspicious father who looked for flaws in his son's partner out of protectiveness. With genuine curiosity and a commitment to seeing what was actually there rather than what I wanted to see. What I saw over the course of that year was a specific pattern. Vanessa was drawn to signifiers, not to things themselves, but to what things communicated about the person who had them. She was interested in Marcus's earning potential, not in the abstract way of someone thinking practically about a shared future, but in the specific way of someone for whom other people's resources were a primary variable in her own life calculation. She was also skilled. I want to give her full credit for this. She was genuinely skilled at managing perceptions, at presenting herself in whatever form a given situation required, at reading what people wanted to see and showing them that thing, at creating a narrative about herself that was consistent and believable, and that most people accepted without question. Most people. She and Marcus got engaged in 2019. They married in 2020 in a small ceremony that was small not because they preferred small, but because a pandemic had removed the option of the large event that Vanessa had clearly been planning mentally for some time. She was gracious about it publicly. In private, in a conversation I was not meant to hear through a partially open door at Thanksgiving 2020, she told Marcus that she had been cheated out of the wedding she deserved by circumstances, and that when this was all over, she expected something that made up for it. Marcus said, "Vanessa, we are married. That is what matters." She said, "Of course it is. I just want the world to know it the right way." I walked past the door and did not stop. The card is something I need to explain in full because it is central to everything that happened at the resort, and because the story of how Vanessa came to have it tells you a great deal about both of us. In 2021, Marcus came to me with a request. He and Vanessa were expecting their first child, my granddaughter Lily, who arrived in September of that year, and who is the most perfect human being I have ever met in 6 decades of meeting human beings. Marcus was asking for help with a financial bridge. They had bought a house that was slightly more than their current cash position could handle comfortably alongside the costs of preparing for a baby, and he wanted to know if I could help with a short-term support arrangement. I could, and I did. I set up an arrangement that included a Black American Express card, the Centurion card, the one that required an invitation and a spending level that communicated a very specific tier of financial resources, on an account that I owned and that I designated for family expenses. The arrangement, as I explained it to Marcus, was this: the card was for family needs, medical costs, Lily's expenses as she grew, genuine family necessities. It was a backstop. It was not a personal spending account. It was not a lifestyle subsidy. It was for the family. Marcus understood this. Vanessa understood something different. What Vanessa understood was that she had access to a Black Amex. The specific meaning of that card in the social world she was navigating was significant. It was not just a payment method. It was a signal. It communicated to anyone who saw it exactly the kind of financial position that Vanessa had been working toward positioning herself within. She used it for family expenses initially, then for things that were adjacent to family expenses, then for things that were genuinely her own. I tracked the card. I always tracked the card, not because I was suspicious in the early months, but because it was my account, and I monitored all my accounts as a professional habit that 30 years of financial work had made automatic. The spending pattern shifted over the course of 2022 and into 2023. Dinners that were clearly social events, not involving Marcus or Lily, spa visits, shopping at stores whose names I recognized as occupying the specific tier of retail that communicated status rather than quality, personal training sessions, a weekend at a hotel in Asheville that the dates and the charge description indicated did not include Marcus, who was traveling for work that same weekend. The Asheville charge was the one that made me sit down at my desk and look at the full statement history carefully for the first time. I spent 2 hours doing that. At the end of 2 hours, I had a complete picture. In the 18 months since the card arrangement had been in place, approximately $37,000 of the total spending was clearly and directly family related. Approximately $29,000 was not. I did not call Marcus. I did not cancel the card. I waited. What I was waiting for, I could not have told you precisely. Some further clarification, perhaps. Some signal that would tell me what the right next action was. I had not built 30 years of professional judgment by reacting to the first thing I saw. I had built it by looking at the complete situation and understanding what it actually meant before I decided what to do. The signal came in April. It came on a Tuesday evening at the dinner table in my house on Meridian Hill Drive. Marcus had invited me to dinner, a regular occurrence. We ate together about twice a month, and Lily was there in her high chair eating something orange with great concentration that I found completely absorbing to watch. The maple tree was visible through the kitchen window. The spring evening light was the specific soft gold of April in Charlotte, when the temperature was exactly right and the air still had a faint freshness to it that would be gone by June. Vanessa had been on her phone through most of the meal. Not rudely, she was skilled enough to do it in the specific managed way that communicated she was handling something important rather than being dismissive. The distinction was meaningful to her, the performance of it. Marcus mentioned that he had booked a family vacation for June, a luxury resort in Scottsdale, 5 nights. The details he described were specific and thoughtful, a resort with a proper children's program for Lily, outdoor activities, a pool situation that he knew both Vanessa and I would enjoy. He had been planning it for 2 months. I could tell from the way he described it that he had put genuine care into the selection. He said, "Dad, you're obviously coming. I already reserved connecting rooms." I said, "I would love that." Vanessa looked up from her phone for the first time in 20 minutes. She said, "Actually, Marcus, I wanted to talk to you about that." Her voice was the specific calm of someone who had already decided something and was now managing the announcement of it. Marcus said, "About what?" She looked at me, then at Marcus. She said, "I have been thinking about what kind of environment I want Lily growing up in, the kind of energy around her, the people who are part of her life, and what they model for her." The table was quiet. She said, "I think this vacation should just be us, the 3 of us, as a family unit." Marcus said, "Dad is family." She said, "Of course he is, but I want this trip to feel like a specific thing, a successful family trip, the kind of environment where Lily sees what success looks like and starts to feel it as her normal." Marcus said, "I still don't understand what." She looked at me directly. She said, "Robert, you have had a nice career, but I think what I am trying to say is that we only want successful people around Lily, people who model the life we are building for her." The table was completely still. Marcus stared at his plate. Lily ate her orange thing. The maple tree was visible through the kitchen window, and the evening light was on it, and I thought about my father driving his truck to the mill 7 miles from town every morning for 32 years. And I thought about my mother's Singer sewing machine, and Mr. Harrigan saying your son sees numbers differently, and Gerald Henderson saying go do what I know you are going to do. And I thought about 30 years of work that had produced something real and true and built from the ground up. Then I looked at Vanessa. She was watching me with the specific expression of someone who had made a calculation and was confident in the outcome. I said, "I understand completely." She smiled. Marcus looked at me with an expression I recognized as the specific look of a man who knew something wrong had just happened and who did not yet know what to do about it. I said, "Marcus, dinner was wonderful. I should let you all get Lily to bed." I said good night. I hugged Lily. I shook Marcus's hand and held it for a moment. I drove home. I sat at my desk. I opened my laptop. I opened the account management portal for the Black American Express card. I looked at the account for a moment. Then I canceled it. Not suspended, canceled. Immediate termination, all associated cards inactivated effective that night, account closed. 0 access to further credit on the account from any card linked to it. It took about 4 minutes. I closed the laptop. I made a cup of tea. I sat in my study and I looked at the maple tree through the window in the dark, visible only because of the backyard light I always left on. I thought I built this from nothing, from a town with a speedway that everybody else came to look at on weekends, from a father who drove the same truck to the same mill for 32 years, from a mother whose machine made a sound that I can still hear when I close my eyes. I thought nobody who lives in this house because of me gets to tell me who I am. Then I went to bed. I slept very well. Hit the like button and keep watching, because the next point is where the vacation actually happens, where Vanessa arrives at the resort with a card that does not work, and where the specific mechanics of what happened next unfolded in ways that I had not entirely planned, but that were entirely correct. The Aria Grand Resort in Scottsdale, Arizona, was the kind of place that existed to communicate a specific version of what life could look like. I know this because I looked it up the week after the Tuesday dinner, not because I had any intention of going myself, but because understanding what Vanessa had planned required understanding the specific environment she had chosen. The resort had 600 rooms on 40 acres of Sonoran desert landscape, 3 pools, a spa that required a separate reservation for most services, a signature restaurant that had been written about in the kind of travel publications that people who needed their travel choices validated were likely to read. The nightly rate for the suite that Marcus had booked was $2,200. I know this because Marcus mentioned it to me in a phone call 4 days after the Tuesday dinner. He called on a Saturday morning. His voice had the specific quality it had when he was carrying something uncomfortable and was trying to figure out how to put it down. He said, "Dad, about Tuesday." I said, "Marcus, you do not need to." He said, "She was wrong to say what she said. I want you to know I told her that." I said, "I appreciate that, son." He said, "I want you to come on the trip. I am going to talk to her again." I said, "Marcus, listen to me carefully. I am not going to insert myself into a situation that your wife has made clear she does not want me in. That is not how I operate. What I am telling you is that you should go on your vacation and enjoy it, and I will be here when you get back." He said, "That doesn't feel right." I said, "It is right, trust me." He was quiet. Then he said, "I should not have booked connecting rooms without talking to both of you first." I said, "You were trying to include your father in a family trip. There is nothing wrong with that." He said, "Dad." I said, "Marcus, go on your vacation, take Lily to the pool, take a lot of pictures." He said, "Okay." He did not know about the card. I had not told him. What I had told him in the same conversation was this: I want you to handle the resort billing directly through the resort's account system when you check in. Set up a direct billing account in your name. Do not use any card that has been linked to my account. He said, "Why?" I said, "Just trust me on this." He said, "Dad, is something going on with the account?" I said, "The account has been closed. I will explain everything when you get back." Silence. He said, "Closed." I said, "Yes." More silence. He said, "When?" I said, "The night after Tuesday dinner." The silence that followed had a very specific quality. It was the silence of a man putting pieces together. He said, "She was using it for." I said, "We will talk about it when you get back." He said, "How much?" I said, "A meaningful amount. We will go through it together when you are home, and I will show you the statements." He said something that I am not going to repeat because it was the kind of thing a man said when he was angry and surprised simultaneously, and when the anger was directed not at me, but at the situation he was finding himself in. I understood it. I did not hold it against him. He said, "Okay, I will set up direct billing at the resort." He paused. He said, "What about Vanessa? She is going to try to use the card." I said, "I know." He said, "And?" I said, "And she will find out at that point that it does not work. What she does with that information is up to her." He said, "Dad, she is going to be." I said, "Marcus, she told me I was not successful enough to be around your daughter, at my own dinner table, in my own house. She has been using a card on my account for $29,000 worth of personal expenses over 18 months. I have been patient about both of those things, but patience is not infinite and it is not unconditional." He was quiet. He said, "I understand." I said, "I know you do. Go on your vacation. Call me when you land." He called when they landed. He had set up direct billing in his own name at the resort front desk when they checked in. He texted me a photo of Lily in the resort lobby wearing sunglasses that were 3 sizes too large for her face, looking extremely pleased with herself. I saved that photo. The dinner on the first night was at the resort's signature restaurant, a place called Copperstone that had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the desert landscape, and a menu that the resort's website described as elevated southwestern cuisine, which in practice meant beautifully presented food at prices that communicated the resort's general philosophy about what things were worth. The bill for the 4 of them, Marcus, Vanessa, Lily, and Vanessa's friend Camille, who had been invited along because Vanessa preferred to travel with a witness to her life at this level, came to just over $8,000 with a generous tip. Marcus paid it with his card. He did not mention this to me. I know the details because he told me the full story when he got back, including the specific moment-by-moment account of what happened at the next dinner, which was the one that changed everything. The second night they ate at the same restaurant because Lily had enjoyed it, and Lily's enjoyment was the primary logistical consideration of most family decisions when you have a 2-year-old who has strong opinions about her environment. Vanessa's friend Camille had invited 2 additional people from a group they had met at the pool that afternoon. The group at dinner was now 7 people. The ordering reflected this expansion in the way that ordering reflected expansion when the person managing the table was accustomed to having access to resources she had not earned. The bill came to $9,412. Marcus was in the restroom. Vanessa had the server's attention before Marcus returned. She said, "I will take care of this." She opened her clutch. She placed the black American Express Centurion card on the table with the specific gesture of someone who had practiced this exact movement until it communicated exactly what she wanted it to communicate. The card was matte black and had a specific weight and texture that distinguished it from every other card in existence. Placing it on a restaurant table was a statement. She knew it was a statement. She made it intentionally. The server took the card. Vanessa continued her conversation with Camille. The server came back 2 minutes later. He leaned down and spoke quietly. He said, "Ma'am, I am sorry, but this card is being declined. Do you have another form of payment?" Vanessa looked at him. She said, "Run it again." He said, "I did run it again. It is declined. The card is showing as inactive." Vanessa looked at the card in the server's hand. She said, "That is not possible." He said, "I am sorry. Is there another card you would like to use?" Marcus returned from the restroom at this precise moment. He took in the scene, the server with the card, Vanessa's expression, the specific quality of the table's silence. In about 2 seconds, he said nothing. He took out his own card and handed it to the server. He said, "Use this, please. Thank you." The server took it and left. The table was quiet in the way that tables were quiet when something had happened that everyone present understood and that nobody was going to be the first to name. Vanessa looked at Marcus. She said, "The card is not working." He said, "I know." She said, "What does that mean, you know?" He said, "It means the account was closed." She said, "By who?" Marcus looked at her steadily. He said, "Vanessa." She said, "Marcus, that card was closed without anyone telling me. That is." He said, "Vanessa, this is not the time or the place." She said, "It absolutely is the time and the place because I just..." She stopped herself. She was aware of Camille and Camille's friends watching. She picked up the card from the table where the server had left it and she put it in her clutch. She said, "We will talk about this later." Marcus said, "Yes, we will." They did not eat much for the rest of the evening. But the evening was not over. Camille's friend, a man named Devon who had met them at the pool and who had the specific quality of someone who was comfortable spending money that he was confident other people would cover, said at the end of dinner that he had heard the resort's bar had a private lounge on the rooftop that required a member introduction to access, and that he had the introduction and they should all go. Vanessa, whose emotional management system was working very hard in the aftermath of the card situation, and who was not yet ready to be alone with Marcus and the conversation that was waiting there, said yes immediately. They went. The rooftop lounge was exactly what Devon had said it was. Private, beautifully designed, the kind of space that existed to make certain people feel that their life had the correct texture. A sommelier who came to the table. A menu that had no prices on it because prices were for people who needed to think about prices. Vanessa ordered. With the confidence of someone who had not yet fully absorbed the practical implications of the evening's earlier development, Vanessa ordered. The bill at the end of the evening was $3,218. Devon, who had extended the invitation, produced a card that was declined on the first attempt, and then excused himself to make a call and did not return. Camille produced a card with a limit that covered approximately $800 of the bill. The remaining $2,418 sat on the table. The lounge manager, a man named Francisco, who had the specific professional composure of someone who had managed uncomfortable financial situations at luxury venues for 20 years, and who knew exactly how to handle each variety of them, came to the table personally. He said, "I apologize for the situation. We do need to settle the bill this evening." Vanessa said, "There has clearly been a misunderstanding with our card. I need to call my father-in-law." Francisco said, "Of course, I can give you a few minutes." She called Marcus. He was in the room. He came down. He paid the bill. And then Francisco, with the specific discretion that his role required and the specific concern that his venue's liability policies also required, mentioned that Devon, the guest who had provided the introduction to the private lounge and who had departed without settling his portion of the bill, had presented himself as a member of the lounge's private program, and that his credentials did not appear to be legitimate, and that the resort's security team had flagged the situation and contacted the Scottsdale Police Department as a routine matter related to potential fraud on the premises. The police arrived at the lounge at 11:47 in the evening. They were not there for Vanessa, but she was there when they arrived. And the specific experience of being in a private rooftop lounge at a luxury resort when the police walked in, of having the lounge manager speak with officers while other guests watched, of being associated in the ambient awareness of that room with a situation that had attracted law enforcement. That experience communicated something to Vanessa in a way that no conversation I could ever have had with her would have communicated. The next morning, she called me. I was at my desk, 5:45, coffee, laptop. The light was just starting and the maple tree was a dark shape against a lighter sky. My phone rang and her name appeared on the screen, and I looked at it for a moment. I answered. She said, "Robert." I said, "Vanessa." She said, "I want to talk about the card." I said, "Okay." She said, "I think there has been." I said, "Vanessa, stop. Before you frame this as a misunderstanding, I want to tell you something. I have the complete statement history for the 18 months that account was active. I have categorized every transaction, $37,412 in legitimate family expenses, $28,907 in what I would characterize as personal spending that was not part of the arrangement that card was set up for." Silence. Long silence. She said, "Robert." I said, "I am not finished. You told me at my own dinner table, in my own house, that you only wanted successful people around your daughter. I want to be clear that I am not responding to that comment with anger. I am responding to it with information. The information is that the life you have been living, the card, the resort, the rooftop lounge last night, that life exists because of work that I did over 30 years, starting from nothing in a town that most people drove through on their way to somewhere else. I am very successful, Vanessa. The only question was whether you were willing to see it. She said nothing. I said, I hope the rest of the vacation is pleasant. Kiss Lily for me. I ended the call. I picked up my coffee. I looked at the maple tree. I thought about my father, about the truck, about showing up every single day without complaint because showing up was the job and the job was what you did. I thought I showed up. Hit that like button and subscribe because we are not done. The next point is the conversation with Marcus that changed everything between us and the specific decisions that came after that settled the situation permanently. Marcus came to my house on the Tuesday after they got back from Scottsdale. Alone. That detail mattered. He came alone, which meant he had made a deliberate decision about the conversation he was coming to have and had decided he needed to have it without Vanessa present. He was his mother's son in that way. Ellen had always understood that certain conversations required the right conditions to produce anything real, and that the presence of the wrong person was the most reliable way to prevent anything real from being said. He sat in my study. I made coffee. We sat across from each other the way we had sat across from each other in that room probably 100 times over the years. When he was a teenager working through something, when he was in college, when he was deciding about graduate school, when he was thinking about marrying Vanessa and had wanted to talk about it before he proposed. I had told him then what I am about to tell you. I told him now. He said, Dad, I need you to tell me everything. The card, the statements, all of it. I opened my laptop. I had prepared a summary document the week before, not because I anticipated this exact conversation, but because 30 years of financial work had made me someone who organized information before a significant discussion rather than relying on memory to produce it in the moment. The document was 4 pages. Transaction categories, dates, amounts, totals, clean and clear and entirely factual. I turned the laptop around and let him read it. He read it without saying anything. He read it twice. When he looked up, his expression was the specific expression of a man who was holding something too heavy and was looking for somewhere to put it down. He said, $28,000. I said, yes. He said, in 18 months. I said, yes. He said, and you knew. I said, I knew for the past several months. I was watching the pattern develop and I was deciding how to respond to it. He said, why didn't you tell me? I said, because I wanted to be certain of what I was seeing before I brought it to you, and because part of what I was seeing was about your marriage, and I did not want to insert myself into your marriage based on something I had not fully documented. He said, so you waited. I said, I waited until she gave me a reason that made the conversation unavoidable. He said, Tuesday dinner. I said, yes. He was quiet for a long time. He said, Dad, I need to tell you something that I should have told you a long time ago. I said, okay. He said, I have been aware that something was not right, not the card specifically. I did not know about the card, but something about the way Vanessa approached things, the way she talked about people, what she thought mattered and what she thought did not matter. He paused. He said, I told myself it was something that would change as she got older, as she settled into the life we were building. I told myself that underneath the surface stuff, there was someone real who I had seen and who I knew was there. I said, was she there? He said, yes, but she was not in charge. The surface stuff was in charge, and I let it be in charge because... He stopped. I waited. He said, because she made the life look a specific way, and I liked the way it looked, and I did not ask myself often enough what it actually was. That was an honest thing to say. It was a hard and honest thing to say, and I respected him for saying it. I said, Marcus, I want to tell you something. He looked at me. I said, I am not here to tell you what to do about your marriage. That is yours. What I am here to tell you is what I know from 63 years of living and 30+ years of professional work, looking at the financial situation of people and businesses, and understanding what was actually going on underneath what appeared to be going on. He said, "Tell me." I said, "The way a person spends money tells you who they are. Not because money is the most important thing, because money is one of the clearest windows into what a person actually values when they think the choices do not have visible consequences." Vanessa spent $28,000 of money that was not hers, that she had not earned, that was given for a specific purpose, on things that were entirely about how she appeared to other people and how she felt about herself in the context of that appearance. That is a complete picture of a set of values. It is not the full picture of a person, but it is a clear and accurate picture of a set of values. He said, "And you think those values are not going to change?" I said, "I think those values are very deeply rooted in something that happened long before she met you. And I think changing them requires her deciding to change them, which requires her understanding why they need to change, which requires something to make that clear to her in a way she cannot manage around." He said, "You think Scottsdale was that something?" I said, "I think Scottsdale was a version of it. I think there may need to be more versions." He said, "Or she could decide on her own." I said, "Yes, that is possible. People surprise you." He said, "You think that is unlikely?" I said, "I think it depends on what she loves more, the life she has been performing or the life that is actually available to her if she is honest about what she values." He looked at his coffee cup. He said, "How did you know about the card? How did you track it so carefully?" I said, "Because I track everything that is mine, not out of suspicion, out of discipline, every account, every transaction, every pattern. It is what I have done for 30 years professionally and what I do personally as a matter of habit. I could not notice the pattern once it started." He said, "You watched it for months." I said, "I watched it until I understood what I was seeing." He said, "And then you waited for the moment." I said, "Yes." He said, "Dad." I said, "Yes." He said, "She called you unsuccessful in your own house." I said, "Yes, she did." He said, "I should have." I said, "Marcus, you are 33 years old. You married a woman. You are building a life. The choices inside that life are yours to navigate, and I am going to support you through navigating them. I'm not going to tell you what the right answer is because I do not know what the right answer is for your specific situation. What I know is that you are my son and you have my father's eyes and your mother's way of paying attention to people, and whatever I manage to give you of my own and those are good tools for navigating hard situations." He looked at me. He said, "What did you give me?" I said, "The specific ability to see what is coming before it arrives." He almost smiled. He said, "I didn't see this coming." I said, "You saw something coming. You told me a year ago you were aware that something was not right." He said, "I didn't want to see it clearly." I said, "That is different from not seeing it. You saw it. You chose to look at something else instead. That is a choice that costs you something eventually. You know that now." He nodded. He said, "What do I do now?" I said, "You have a conversation with Vanessa that is the most honest conversation you have had with her. You tell her what you know about the card. You tell her what I told you about what the statements show. You give her the chance to be honest with you about it, and you listen to what she says, not just the words, but what the words tell you about whether she understands why it was wrong or whether she just understands that she got caught." He said, "And if she just understands that she got caught?" I said, "Then you know something important that I think you already know." He sat with that. He said, "I love her." I said, "I know you do." He said, "I love who she is when she is not performing." I said, "I know. I have seen that person too. She exists. Whether she can choose herself over the performance consistently enough to build a real life on, that is what you are going to find out." He left at 2 in the afternoon. I walked him to the door. He hugged me in the way he had hugged me since he was a teenager. with the full physical presence of someone who meant it rather than the polite contact of a social hug. He said, "I love you, Dad." I said, "I love you, Marcus. Go take care of your family." He drove away. I went back to my study. I sat at my desk. I looked at the maple tree through the window. I thought about Ellen standing at the kitchen window 20 years ago. I thought about what she had said. "You know that tree is going to outlive both of us." Yes, it was. And everything I had put into the ground over 63 years, the work, the honesty, the specific patient attention to what was actually happening rather than what appeared to be happening, that was going to outlive me too. In the people who had absorbed it. In Marcus, who was driving home right now to have the most important conversation of his marriage. In Lily, who was 2 years old and had no idea yet that her grandfather had planted a tree the year her father was born, and that the tree was still growing. Subscribe right now and hit that like button, because the final point is where everything resolved and where I want to tell you what happened to Vanessa and to Marcus and to the card and to the vacation and to the part of my life that comes after all of it. The conversation between Marcus and Vanessa happened on a Thursday evening 3 days after he came to see me. I know what happened in that conversation because Marcus called me afterward, not immediately but the following morning, when he had slept on it and had enough perspective to tell it clearly rather than emotionally. He had told her about the statements, all of it, the categories, the amounts, the timeline. He had shown her the document I had prepared. He had given her the chance to respond. What she said initially was what people said when they were caught rather than when they understood, a combination of explanation, context, and the specific reframing of events that was designed to shift what the facts meant without disputing the facts themselves. She said that the expenses were things that benefited the family broadly, that maintaining her appearance and her social position was something that benefited Marcus professionally, that the situation was not as clear as the numbers made it seem. Marcus let her finish. Then he asked her one question. He said, "Vanessa, did you tell my father he was not successful enough to be around our daughter?" She said, "I expressed a preference for the environment I wanted for Lily." He said, "That is not what I asked. Did you say we only want successful people around, at his dinner table in his house?" She was quiet. He said, "That man built everything you have been living on from nothing. He grew up with less than almost anyone I have ever known, and he built a practice that is worth more than everything your family has owned in 3 generations. He is the reason we have the life we have, and you told him he was not successful enough." She said, "Marcus." He said, "I am not finished. The card is not the main issue. The card is a symptom. The main issue is that you looked at my father, who is one of the finest people I have ever known, and you decided he was not enough, because his car is 7 years old and he does not wear his money on the outside, because he is quiet and does not perform his success for rooms full of strangers, because he is not the version of successful that you recognize." She said nothing. He said, "You knew he would be hurt by what you said. You said it anyway, and I sat there and did not stop you, and that is something I have to account for separately. But I am telling you now that I am not going to choose between you and my father. I am going to require that you treat him with the respect he has earned, and I am going to need to know that you understand why." She said, "Marcus, I was not trying to." He said, "Vanessa, I need you to stop framing it. I need you to just tell me whether you understand why it was wrong, not why it looked wrong or why it had bad consequences, why it was actually wrong." The silence that followed was, according to Marcus, very long. Then Vanessa said something that Marcus had not expected. She said, "I have been afraid." He said, "Of what?" She said, "Of not being enough, of being in a life that I could lose, of people seeing through the surface and finding something that was not worth keeping." Marcus told me this in the phone call the next morning, and I want to repeat it here because it is important, and because it is the piece of Vanessa's story that I had always suspected was underneath everything else she had built. She was afraid. Not of me specifically, of what I represented, the possibility that the life she had constructed around appearances could be seen through by someone who understood what was real. I had spent 30 years professionally seeing through surfaces to what was actually there. She had understood this about me from the first dinner, and it had made her defensive in the specific aggressive way of people who feared being clearly seen. That was not an excuse. I want to be clear about that. Understanding why someone does a harmful thing does not make the thing less harmful, but it was information. Important information about whether what Marcus was dealing with was a character that could not change or a fear that could be worked through if someone was willing to do the work. Marcus said, "I think she is willing to try." I said, "Then that is the beginning of something." He said, "I want to bring her to see you, not to apologize, though she will, to talk, actually talk. I think there are things she needs to hear from you, and I think there are things you deserve to say to her directly." I said, "Whenever you are ready." They came on a Sunday. Lily came with them and immediately ran to the backyard because she had discovered on a previous visit that the maple tree had a root system at its base that was interesting to small people, and that the squirrels near it were committed to being interesting at consistent intervals. I made coffee. We sat in the kitchen. Vanessa sat across from me in the same chair Marcus sat in when he was 17 and working through something. She looked different from the Tuesday dinner. Not dressed differently, she was still put together in the careful way that was her baseline. Different in the way that people looked when they had been having the specific, hard, honest conversations that reorganized how they held themselves. She said, "Robert." I said, "Vanessa." She said, "I want to say something and I want to say it without making excuses for it." I said, "Okay." She said what I said at dinner was wrong, not in the obvious social way of something that was impolite, actually wrong. I looked at you and I decided something about you that was not true because it made me feel more comfortable to put you in a category that I could be above. I did that because I have been doing that to people for a long time as a way of managing something inside myself that I was not willing to look at. She paused. She said, "I am looking at it now." I said, "I know, Marcus told me some of it." She said, "He should not have." I said, "He told me because he knew I needed to understand the context. He was right to. Context matters. It does not change what happened, but it matters for what comes next." She looked at me with the specific expression of someone who was not sure what they were about to hear. I said, "Vanessa, I want to tell you something about the card and the money, not to make you feel bad about it, to explain what it meant to me." She said, "Okay." I said, "I grew up with nothing. My parents had nothing by any material measure. What they had was work and integrity and genuine attention to the people they loved. My father drove the same truck to the same mill for 32 years, and he never complained once. My mother made clothing for neighbors on a machine that ran from morning until night, and she never once indicated that this was less than what she deserved or less than what her life was worth." I looked at her directly. I said, when I saw the pattern in those statements, I was not angry about the money specifically. I was troubled by what it communicated about how you saw the arrangement. You were using something that was given for specific purposes as a tool for something else entirely. And the something else was about how you appeared to other people. That is a choice that reflects what you actually value when you think the consequences are manageable. She said, "Yes." I said, "And then you came to my dinner table and you told me I was not successful enough to be around my granddaughter. And I want to tell you what that felt like from my side. It felt like someone who had been living off the products of my work for years, looking me in the eye and telling me that my work was not impressive enough for their standards. That is a specific kind of pain. It is not just hurt feelings. It is the pain of being erased by someone who is standing on the foundation you built." She said, "I know." She looked at the table. She said, "I am sorry, Robert, not the social kind of sorry. The kind where I understand what I did and I understand why it was wrong, and I am telling you I know and I would not do it again." I looked at her for a long moment. I said, "I believe you." She looked up. I said, not because I need to believe it, because I have been reading people's actual condition underneath their surface presentation for 30 years, and right now, I can see that you are saying something true. She exhaled slowly. From the backyard came the sound of Lily's voice, something enthusiastic and detailed being communicated about a squirrel, directed at nobody or possibly at the squirrel itself. We both looked toward the window. Vanessa said, "She is something." I said, "She is exactly something." She said, "She is going to be so much more than I have been." I looked at her. I said, "Or the same, but with better tools. She has good parents who are willing to have hard conversations. That matters more than anything else." She said nothing, but something in her face shifted in the specific way that faces shifted when something landed that was going to stay. We drank our coffee. After a while, Marcus came in from the backyard with Lily on his shoulders, and Lily was holding a leaf that she had decided was important, and she held it out to me when Marcus put her down, and she said, "Grandpa, look." I looked at the leaf. I said, "That is a good leaf, Lily." She considered this assessment and apparently found it satisfactory because she went to show it to Vanessa next. Vanessa held the leaf with both hands and looked at it with the specific careful attention that Lily required from the people she showed things to. She said, "This is a very good leaf." Lily said, "I know." I watched this and I thought about my father's hands on the truck that he kept running for 32 years. I thought about the maple tree in the backyard that was 34 feet tall now and that Ellen had said would outlive both of us. I thought everything I put in the ground keeps growing. The financial situation was settled over the following 2 months. Marcus and I sat together with the statements and worked out a structured repayment arrangement for the portion of the spending that had been outside the original purpose of the card. Not because I needed the money, I did not. Because the acknowledgement mattered. Because money is a clear window into values, and the way a person chose to handle a financial obligation said something true about whether their understanding of what had happened was real or performed. Vanessa handled it with the specific quiet seriousness of someone who was doing something that was uncomfortable and who understood why it was necessary. She did not minimize it or negotiate around it. She accepted the terms and she kept to them. That told me something real about her. A new card arrangement was established, different structure, different purpose, clear terms that Marcus and I worked out together and that Vanessa was part of the conversation about, which was the right way for it to have been structured from the beginning and which I had not insisted on initially because I had been extending trust in the way I extended trust to most situations, which was fully at first and then based on observation thereafter. The observation had produced a recalibration. The recalibration had produced the current arrangement. That was just how things worked when you paid attention. I want to tell you about a Sunday in November, 6 months after Scottsdale. Marcus and Vanessa and Lily came for dinner. I made my father's roast chicken recipe, the one I had watched him make on Sundays when I was growing up, and that I had learned from him by watching rather than from a recipe card, because there was no recipe card. There was just a man who knew how a chicken wanted to be cooked and who cooked it that way every Sunday. We ate at the kitchen table. Lily sat in the high chair that I had bought specifically for her visits, and that lived in the corner of the kitchen between visits in the specific way of a piece of furniture that was waiting to be useful again. After dinner, Marcus took Lily to the backyard to show her the maple tree in the evening light, which was something he had started doing on visits because Lily had become interested in the tree and Marcus had told her the story of when I planted it. Vanessa stayed in the kitchen. She helped me clear the table in the specific, competent way of someone who had decided to be present in a domestic situation rather than to manage it from a distance. She said, "This was a good dinner, Robert." I said, "It was my father's recipe." She said, "You should write it down." I said, "I keep meaning to." She said, "Write it down for Lily. She is going to want to know how to make it someday." I looked at her. I said, "That is a good idea." She said, "She is going to want to know a lot of things from you. You should start writing things down." I said, "What kinds of things?" She said, "The real things, like where you came from, what it was like, how you built what you built, not the impressive version, the real version with the hard parts." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because she should know that things that look like they were actually put there by someone. One careful decision at a time." I looked at her. She was looking out the window at Marcus and Lily and the maple tree in the November evening light. She said, "I am starting to understand that things that look like they were actually built." I said, "Yes." She said, "I am sorry it took me this long to see it." I said, "It took me a while to see some things too. That is just how it worked." She was quiet. Then she said, "Robert." I said, "Yes." She said, "Thank you for not giving up on this family." I looked at the maple tree through the window. I thought about my father. I said, "That is not something I know how to do." Hit that like button, subscribe, drop a comment and tell me what you think. I read every single one. I want to say one thing before you go, and I want to say it simply because simple is what this comes down to. I grew up with nothing. A textile mill, a sewing machine, a town that most people drove through on their way somewhere else, a truck that needed to keep running because it was not optional, parents who showed up every single day without complaint because showing up was the job. That is where everything I have came from. Not from luck, not from connections, not from being in the right place, from the specific daily choice of showing up, paying attention, doing the work completely, and not cutting corners in the load-bearing places. Vanessa called me unsuccessful at my own dinner table. She did not know what unsuccessful looked like from the inside. I have known it from the inside. I have known the 4 months of 2 in the morning uncertainty when I had opened my own practice and had no clients. I have known the specific weight of a student loan that needed to be paid back one careful month at a time. I have known what it felt like to eat in the restaurant where you worked and not the restaurant where you wanted to eat because the math required it. I built through all of that. Not by being extraordinary, by being consistent, by being the kind of person who did what needed to be done the way my father drove his truck and my mother ran her machine, without drama, without expecting the world to notice, with the specific patience of someone who understood that the tree you planted today would be 34 feet tall by the time you were old enough to really appreciate it. Vanessa is learning something. I believe that, I see it. She is learning that the foundation matters more than the surface, that what something costs and who paid that cost is not irrelevant information. It is the most important information, that the people who appear to have nothing are sometimes the people who built everything. Marcus knows this. Lily is going to know this. I am going to write it down. For her, for this story, for anyone who has ever been called unsuccessful by someone standing on ground they built. If you are watching this and someone has dismissed you, overlooked you, decided you were not enough, I want you to hear this clearly. The tree you are planting right now is going to be 34 feet tall someday. You will not see that when you are digging the hole. You will not see it when you are carrying the water through the hard early years. You will only see it when you are sitting at your desk at 5:45 in the morning with your coffee, looking out the window at something that is finally as big as what you always knew it was going to be. Keep planting. Hit that like button, subscribe, drop a comment, tell me where you are watching from, tell me about your maple tree, whatever it is that you have been building quietly that the people around you have not fully seen yet. I read every comment, every single one.